Hello, Saints. We're looking again at chapter 16 on the seven last plagues. We're going to look at the sixth one particularly. That begins in verse 12 and reads, "The sixth poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its waters was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Then I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming from the dragon's mouth, from the beast's mouth, and from the mouth of the false prophet. For there are demonic spirits performing signs, who travel to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for the battle of the great day of God the Almighty. Look, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who is alert and remains clothed, so that he may not go around naked and people see his shame." So they assembled the kings at the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. Now this isn't the battle of Armageddon, but this is the preparation for it. This is the last deception. Notice that the bowl is poured out upon the river Euphrates and dries it up. A lot of people are looking for a little drying up of the river Euphrates, but this is apocalyptic language. John is using the language of the past to explain the present and the future. So if you go back to Isaiah chapter 8, you'll see a definition of what the river Euphrates is in prophecy or in symbol. In chapter 8 of Isaiah, the river Euphrates is described as overflowing its banks and flowing down to Judah, to where its depth is up to the bridles of the horses. Now that doesn't mean that the river is literally overflowing its banks and flowing down to Judah. It would never be that deep. There's not enough water in the river. The river isn't as deep as you think. It's a pretty shallow river. But the Assyrians are there, and they had just come in and took the northern kingdom, Israel, the 10 tribes up north. And then they come down to Judah, and they surrounded the capital there in Jerusalem. And they were there a short time before the king packed up and left, and they had peace for about 100 years. This was a picture of Sennacherib coming down, surrounding Jerusalem. They were up to their necks in Assyrians, but not overwhelmed. And this is the description of the river being used to describe the enemy of God's people. In the book of Revelation, John is using this language to talk about the enemy of God's people, the river. And the drying up of the river, as the background to that, is Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, where his grandson, Belshazzar, was king that fateful night when Cyrus diverted the waters of the river so he could get under the gate and come in and take the city. The drying up of the rivers spelled doom for Babylon. The drying up of the river Euphrates spells doom for God's enemies in the prophecy. So John again is using the language of the past to explain the present and the future. This is the symbol of the water, preparing the way, drying up the river, preparing the way for the kings of the east. Who's the kings of the east? Jesus. He's from the east, is where he comes. And then he goes on to describe the three frog-like spirits that come out of the mouths of the sea beast and of the false prophet, the land beast. First time it's called a false prophet. And of the dragon. And what we've got here is the unholy trinity. Now why frogs? Well, in the plagues of the frogs that Moses had brought upon Egypt when he delivered God's people, the frogs were the last plague of Egypt that the magicians of Egypt could somehow duplicate a little bit. And so what we've got here in the symbol of the frogs representing the goddess Hecate, fertility, is that this is the last deception for Satan. It's his last effort as he goes out into the world to deceive the kings and to gather them together for the final confrontation, the battle of Armageddon. Now there is no Armageddon. There is no mountain called Megiddo. That's what Armageddon means, the mountain of Megiddo. But if you go up to where Megiddo is, the mountain that overshadows it is Mount Carmel. That would be the mountain of Megiddo. And what took place on that, you read in 2 Kings 18. Elijah was up there with the prophets and the priests of Baal, and they were offering to their gods. And they each had their altar, calling fire down from heaven to fall on their altar. And the priests of Baal could not call fire down from heaven, but Elijah could on his offering. And so what we've got here is a kind of showdown between who is God, because that's the central question, not just in the last book of Revelation, but in the whole Bible. From the time Adam and Eve sinned and put themselves in the middle, made themselves God, so to speak, the question has always been, who are you going to worship? So when we come to the book of Revelation, the question about who is God, who will you worship, isn't just an end-time question. It's an all-the-time question. And it comes to a conclusion at the end. You and I become the last day Elijahs as we give the call out to worship true Creator God, not the false God that we see in chapter 13, the God that I equate with the Baals of King Ahaz and Jezebel. And so what we've got to see as we see unfolding here is a battle between that God and the true Creator God. As in, I said, may the best God win. Well, we know who wins. Creator God, the one who made heaven and earth and sea and the fountains of water. He wins. He takes back the world. And he is successful in making it new again and expunging sin. This is the final showdown. And it's God's battle. He's not asking us to fight it. Battle of Armageddon takes place at the end of chapter 19 when Jesus comes. That's when the battle comes, right at the end. Jesus is the fire that falls from heaven, and he consumes the wicked. It's that same fire that you and I will dwell in. It will be life for us. It will be death for the sinners. This is the great supper of God, as described in chapter 19 of Revelation, where the birds of the earth will feed on the flesh of the dead. And so this is our picture here, that God's victory is sure. The river of Euphrates dries up. That's the enemy of God's people. We unfold this in chapter 17, where the woman who rides the beast. That's the drying up of Euphrates, as God prepares to come to get his people. Are you ready? Blessings.